Welcome once again. My name is Derek, and I want to welcome those that are online as well. I'm one of the pastors here, and it has been my privilege to be a pastor here for about the past 20 months. The hard part of that is a lot of that time has been during something called the global pandemic, which has been a whole lot of fun, right? But part of that is I know that there's many of you out there, you have not had a chance to meet me, and I have not had a chance to meet you or get to know each other, and I want to take a second so that it's not just some random foreign guy up here that you don't know. Tell you a little bit about myself. If we were to meet and we were to talk, one of the things you would realize about me probably pretty quickly is I'm a pretty upfront and kind of straightforward and some would say blunt guy. I will tell you what I'm thinking. I will tell you things I like. I will tell you things I don't. I would not be classified as Minnesota nice. I grew up in Minnesota, but for some reason, that just never stuck with me. So I want to take a moment, and I want to tell you a few things that I like and a few things I don't like. Would that be okay? All right. Board games. I love board games. I love playing board games. Anybody else love playing board games? Anybody? Yeah? Okay. I see those hands. I for some reason, for me, the way my brain works, the strategy of it, I love trying to figure out what you're going to do, then what I'm going to do, and how I'm going to beat you, or if we're working together, how are we collectively going to accomplish the objective, whatever it is, for whatever reason. I love board games. Strawberries are amazing. I think they may be the most delicious thing on this planet. I love strawberries. I have a theology of strawberries. Now, before I tell you, I need you to promise you're not going to go to my bosses and say, Derek's got some really weird thoughts about strawberries. I don't know if he's getting them out of the Bible. That we might need to get rid of this guy. This isn't biblically based, okay? This is just my own opinion. But I believe that next to God's throne, there's always a bowl of strawberries. And he's just like, because they're so good, they're like candy, and he just eats them. I believe that. I love Star Trek. Do I got anybody else? Yes, you are my people. I love Star Trek. I'm a Trekkie through and through. I grew up watching The Next Generation and all. I fell in love with Star Trek, all of it. I love Star Trek so much that I am totally confident to say that Star Trek blows Star Wars out of the water. And some of you want to fight me right now because I just said that. I love Star Trek. Whipped cream. Not a fan. You threw you, didn't I? You all thought, oh, he's going to, nope. For whatever reason, I don't know what it is, but for whatever reason, I have never liked whipped cream. I think it may be a texture thing. I don't know. I've never liked whipped cream. So much so, and this goes back to what I said about me being blunt, is I would tell my grandma and I tell my mom all the time that I didn't like it, so much so that when they would make banana cream pie, they would make it without whipped cream on it. And everybody else could add it later because Derek doesn't like it and because I was so adamant about it. All right. Seafood. Nope, not a fan. Don't like it. I get it. Growing up in Minnesota, like fishing is not like a rite of passage, like you have to fish. But I can tell you that psychological, but we'd be here for a long time, trust me. I just don't like seafood. I've had it one time in Hawaii where I was like, okay, this is decent, but like I would never choose it. Not a fan of seafood. Horror movies, I'm out. Don't like them. Don't need to even entertain that stuff. I don't need that stuff in my head. Not a fan of horror movies. Roller coasters, not a fan. Mostly because they make me sick. Right? Like all the loops and the twists and if I'm on a roller coaster, I have to concentrate with everything in my being to make sure that the contents of my stomach don't make a reappearance, if you know what I'm saying. And then afterwards, it takes me like 30 minutes to an hour to like right myself to where I feel okay. So I'm just like, no, I don't want to do that to myself. Why? I'm not a fan. We're in this series right now called MIXTAPE, so we're talking about music. So we're talking about music. I got to be honest with you. Not a fan of country music. Not a fan at all. Some of you just checked out. Some of you are like, well, if this guy doesn't like country music, I don't need to listen to a word he says from now on else. He's got bad taste, bad judgment. I'm not a fan of country music. For whatever reason, the genre of country music has never resonated with me. But if you're a fan, hold on for a second. I thought for a lot about what song would I pick, right? As we talk about mixtape and the idea being what are the songs that would be on the soundtrack of your life? What are the songs that I wanted to talk about? And I thought for a long time. I thought about U2 and their song, I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For. Great song. It talks about the journey of people as they're trying to find what they're looking for. I thought that would be a great song to talk about. I grew up listening to Mark Cohn's song, Walking in Memphis. It's a beautiful song. There's a lot of things that you could have touched on in that song, and I thought maybe that's the one, because I grew up with it. That would definitely be one. Billy Joel's Piano Man is one of the greatest songs of all time. I don't care what you say. But the social commentary about people and how they relate to each other and with the world and stuff that's in that song is pretty fascinating. I thought that might be a really cool song. And Kanye West in his Jesus is King album has a song called Use This Gospel that is just this thought-provoking of what the gospel is and what it means for us and all of that. I thought, man, this would be a really cool song to talk about. I thought about this band Half Alive. This is actually friends of mine from out in California, and they have just kind of started getting really big in the music industry, and they are believers who write their songs with Christian undertones, and so they're invading the secular music world with these songs that have these Christian undertones, sometimes more than just undertones, and it's an amazing band. They have a song called Still Feel that I think is incredible. That would be a fun one to talk about, and so if you're looking for new music, I would check them out. Shameless plug for my friends there. I thought about that song, but as I was thinking about songs, there was one that kept popping up over and over. I would think about one song, and then I would think about this song. And I'd think about another song, and then this one would come back in my head, and so on and so on. And so finally, I stopped fighting it, and I said, okay, God, there's probably something here. If this keeps coming up, there's probably something you're telling me, and that I should talk about this song. And that is the song by John Denver called Take Me Home, Country Roads. And I'm hoping I just won back all those country people. And now some of you are like, wait a second, Derek. That's a contradiction. You said you don't like country music, and now you're picking a country song. You're contradicting yourself. You're right, I am. Maybe there's a contradiction in you too, and if you hang with me, maybe you'll see that. But this song, for whatever reason, has always been one I've loved. I've loved this song from the first time I've heard it, and I think it's incredible. Now, some of you in the room, you know this song. But some of you in this room might not know that song. And so what I want to do is I'm going to play a clip for you of that song. I'm going to play the chorus. And for those of you watching online, I have to tell you, because of copyright laws, we're going to have to cut the audio feed because we can't play the song online. So when the audio cuts, just stay with us. We'll come back. That's just for copyright reasons. But for those in the room, here's the deal, though. If I'm going to play this song, this is not one of those songs that you can just listen to. This is one of those songs that you have to sing along to. You know what I'm talking about, right? Like when this song comes on, you just get swept up in it and you have to sing along. So here's what's gonna happen. I'm giving you permission to sing along with the chorus. Don't leave me hanging on this, okay? I'm looking for you guys. Sing it out, have some fun with this, all right? So here's the chorus of the song. Did you know, though, that this song was actually not originally written by John Denver? This song was actually written by a couple, Bill Danoff and Taffy Nivert. They were driving down a country road. They were going to a family get-together, and Bill had his guitar, and as they were driving, he started playing. He wasn't driving and playing, just to be clear. He started playing and he started singing kind of the chorus of the song. And the two of them looked at each other and said, I think we got something here. And they went home after their family get together and they wrote the original version. And when they wrote the original version, they actually wrote it with Johnny Cash in mind. They were like, if we could get this song to Johnny Cash, he'd be great to sing this song. What happened was they were at a music venue and they met John Denver. And they shared with John the song that they had written, and John fell in love with it. And so that night, they went back to their home, and the three of them sat down and they worked through the night. They tirelessly worked. They cut some things, they added some things, they tweaked and changed some other things, and they ended up writing the song that we have today. And John Denver was so excited about this song, the next night he went back to that music venue and he played it. And ever since the first time that John played that song, it resonated with people. It captivated them, it gripped them. And how do I know that? Because the first time John Denver ever played that song live, he got a 5-minute standing ovation at the end of that song. 5-minute standing ovation. Do you know what's even crazier about that? He wasn't in West Virginia. He was in Washington, D.C. of all places, like one of the most transient cities in the United States. He sings a song about home and gets a 5-minute standing ovation. Ever since he did and he sung that song, it has captivated people. And I believe it has captivated people because it harkens to something that we all want, to something we all desire and we all long for, which is home. We all want and we all desire, we all have a need and want for home. Now, I know home for people, it can be across the board and it can be a messy thing and it can be a beautiful thing. But what really is home? I tried to think about what home is, and I was all over the board. Like I thought of one thing, and then I thought, well, but what about this? And then what about, and my mind was all over the place as I tried to think about what home is. And so, because I couldn't figure it out, I decided to go to the experts. So I went to the students of Autumn Ridge Church, and I polled them, and I asked them 2 questions. I said, 1, what do you think of when you hear home? And 2, how would you describe home to someone else? Here's some of their answers. My house. These are the practical pragmatists of our student ministries. They're not wrong, right? That's not a wrong answer. My house. All right. This one, a lot of them said a safe place. There's something in their answer revolved around a safe place. I like that. One student wanted to be very clear what he meant when he said a safe place, and so his answer added this: where people won't kill you. And I thought, I'm on board with that. That's what I want from home. One student said, a place to reground and be stable. I thought, man, that's an insightful answer. Home is a place where you can just kind of reground yourself after whatever's going on and stabilize yourself. One student said, feeling safe, relaxed, happy, free, serene, and at peace. Those are all great things. I would love my home to be those things. One said, someplace you are comfortable, and I love this last line, and you know you have a place. Home is where you know you have a place. Now, my guess is when I said home, for most of us, if not all of us in this room, something popped into your head. It could be something now, it could be something that was in the past, it could be something that you're hoping for in the future, but if I polled everybody in this room, my guess is we would get a whole gamut of answers of what home is. But if we sat down and we had a conversation and we talked about home and what it is and things about it, I think there's at least one thing that we would all ultimately come to a conclusion and agree about. And it's this: in this world, our home is never permanent. Whatever you think of as home, whatever comes into your mind as home, that thing, if it's in this world, is never permanent. Because we as people, we move, right? Sometimes we move because it's our own choice. We take another job, we want to be closer to family, whatever it is, we make the choice, I want to move, and so we move. For some of us, the choice is made for us. We're kicked out of home, or we're evicted, or health comes into the picture. Now we can't stay at home because we have to be somewhere else because of our health. Or ultimately, we all die, and as a result of that, we leave our home. Whatever you think of as home in this world is never permanent. And even though that's the case, though, it's all still something we want and desire. Like, think about when you've been at work for a long day of work. Or you've been at school for a long day of school. Or you've been out doing all kinds of things, running errands, and it's just a full day. What do we so often desire? To go home. We want to go home and we want to kick our feet up and we want to relax and we want to ground ourselves and we want to feel those things. And we want to read a book or hang out with someone or watch some TV or whatever it is. We want to go home. Our desire is to go home. Or I love this one. I don't know if this has ever happened to you. You're on vacation. Vacation should be the time where you're having tons of fun and you're doing all kinds of things, and it should be the time where you get refreshed and you fill your cup because you're on vacation, right? But towards the end of vacation, what do we so often desire? To go home. Like, we're on vacation and we still want to go home. Like, there's something about us that we desire home. And this is what I think this song hits on. I think this is the nerve that it strikes, because look at the chorus again. Country roads take me home to the place I belong. It strikes a chord in us because we all want it. We all long for home. We all desire for home. But what if I told you that the home that you actually truly desire is not four walls and a roof? The home that you're actually wanting and desiring is not found here. To get us there, I want to go back to the beginning. We're going to go back to Genesis. And in Genesis chapter 3, we find Adam and Eve are in the Garden of Eden. And when they're in the Garden of Eden, God tells them there's one thing you can't do, and it's to eat from this tree. And Adam and Eve decide that they want to put themselves first. They decide their desires and their comfort and what they want is more important than what God has said. And so they desire to be number one in their life, to put themselves on the throne of their life. And as a result, then they go and they do the one thing that God tells them not to, and they eat from the tree. And God shows up and says, well, you have done the one thing that I told you not to do, and you've put yourself before me. And as a result, there's now consequences. And in Genesis chapter 3, he lays out what those consequences are in a little list. And it's this: there's increased pain in childbirth, toil of work, hardship of the land, struggle to survive, and ultimately physical death. Now, none of these are good. I don't think anybody in this room would look at this list and say, sign me up. But here's the thing: none of these things are what Adam and Eve experienced in the moment. None of these are the immediate things that they experienced as a result of what they did. Like, Eve didn't all of a sudden break out into a painful childbirth. Like, Adam didn't pick up a shovel and start working the land. And neither of them instantly died on the spot. The first immediate thing that they experienced as a result of what they had done was shame. The first thing they experienced was shame. They hid from God. They didn't want to be found out. They hid from each other. They hid from the nakedness. They felt the shame of what had happened. But the second immediate thing they experienced was being kicked out of their home. That was the second thing they experienced as a result of their sin. Genesis 3. So the Lord banished him from the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he had been taken. After he drove the man out, he placed on the east side of the Garden of Eden a cherubim and a flaming sword flashing back and forth to guard the way to the tree of life. One of the first things that happened as a result of our choices of putting ourselves first, choosing to do what God told us not to do, is we were kicked out of home. Dale Fincher, who's an apologist, he wrote a book called Living with Questions. And in there, he talks about this moment, and he says this: Adam and Eve found themselves kicked out of their home and into the wild. Adam and Eve found themselves kicked out of the place that they found peace, that they found purpose, that they found protection, that they found relationship, out into an unknown and foreign and wild world. And I love how he describes it as wild because it brings to mind a picture of something that if you picture yourself thrust into something that is wild, our first instinct is, I need to tame this. I need to bring this wild to bear. I need to make this wild into something that's good for me and comfortable for me. I need to make this wild into something that I want it to be. And Adam and Eve found themselves there. And if we fast forward to today, we find ourselves in the same place. Not kicked out of our home and into the wild. I don't know if any of you in this room have ever been kicked out of your home. If you have, I would just like to say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you've had to experience that. I'm sorry that you've had to go through that. I personally have never been kicked out of a home, but I can imagine it's a rough time. And so I'm sorry that you've had to experience that. I have an experience, though, that I think is in the ballpark. And I want to share it with you, because I think it helps us understand what's going on here. Freshman year of college, I lived with a guy named Rich. We lived together freshman year, and it was great. We had a lot of fun together, and things I thought were fantastic. And it came about time to kind of re-up, and you had to re-sign up for your room and your roommate and all that kind of stuff. And in my mind, I thought, yeah, we're going to room together again next year. And a few days before this was going to happen, I just thought, you know what, I should probably make sure just to double check. And so I found Rich and in our room, and I said, hey, I just want to double check and make sure we're going to room together next year, right? Like, we're going to just stay, everything's good, right? And he freezes in his tracks. Emotion just kind of drains from his face. He looks at me and goes, oh, I'm going to room with this guy. And he mentions another guy who lives on our floor. And I said, wait, what? He said, yeah, and we're going to use this room. And I said, when were you going to tell me? I don't know. Well, what do I do now? I don't know. And in that moment, I felt kicked out of home, and I felt like I was in the wild. And every inclination of my mind and my heart in that moment forgot about all the things I knew about who I was and who God said I was and what God says. And it focused on my immediate situation. And I went into scramble mode to try to tame that wild. And I went into scramble mode to try to make that circumstance and that wild into what I thought it should be and to make me comfortable. And so I went to every single person that lived on that floor and asked them if they had a roommate yet, and they all did. And I ended up finding a guy, and I didn't really know him, but he needed a roommate, and so we ended up rooming together, and we tried to get a room on the floor that I was on, but all of the rooms were taken, and so we ended up on a different floor. And every inclination of my heart forgot all the things God had told me about who I was, and I forgot all about the hope of heaven and all of that for my immediate circumstances, and wanted to turn the wild into what I wanted it to be. And so I did everything and made all the decisions to try to make that happen. And so I tried to hang out with those other people that I had roomed with and lived with for the rest of my college experience, because just thinking, man, if I just hang out with them, eventually somebody's going to invite me back, or eventually I'll get back on there and it'll go back to the way that it was, and it will go back to what was comfortable for me and what I wanted it to be. And man, if I could go back and I could sit down freshman Derek, I could sit him down and I'd tell him, hey, I know that this is not fun right now, and I know that this sucks, but do not forget who you are. Do not forget that God decides who you are, that God decides how valuable you are. Don't forget that there's a hope of heaven and a hope of something better than your present circumstances here and now. And here's the thing is, because I forgot those things, what happened was I neglected the here and the now. I neglected the people that were around me. I neglected building relationships on my new floor. I neglected building relationships with the people around me and the opportunities that were there. because I was focused on only what felt like the wild, and I was focused on what I wanted it to be and how to make it what I wanted. And I missed out on everything else that God wanted for me. And I lost sight of the fact that this is not home and that there is a hope of heaven that is in us. Ecclesiastes 3:11 says this, "He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end." See, I believe that God has set something inside of us, that God has set a hope of heaven inside each and every one of us. The problem is sometimes we don't recognize what that is. We don't understand what that is. That we are captivated by the here and now, that we miss what God has set this eternity set in our hearts is. And here's why I believe that is because at some point, I think every single one of us has a moment, at least, if not much more than that, where in this world we go, man, something just doesn't seem right here. Something about this world just doesn't seem right. C.S. Lewis, who's a writer and theologian, in his book Mere Christianity, talks about this very thing. He says this, "If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world." That we as people, there are moments where we can't reconcile what I'm feeling with what's here. That there's something in us that recognizes, man, this world is just not the way it's supposed to be. There are things I wish this world was that it isn't. And the only explanation is that we were not made for this world. We were made with a hope of heaven and to recognize that this is not our home. And this idea of the hope of heaven that's set inside of us, that gives us a picture of something greater, is what I think the writer of Hebrews is talking about when he is in Hebrews chapter 11. In Hebrews chapter 11, he talks about characters, people from the Old Testament. It's affectionately called by some the Hall of Faith, a play on the Hall of Fame kind of idea, and it takes a look at people in the Old Testament who had faith in God and allowed that faith in God to give them a hope of heaven to then interact in the world in ways they never would have. And in chapter 11, as he's talking about these individuals, he comes to a section where he dives into the motivations that would lead someone to do the things that these people did. And he says this, all these people, the people he's talking about in chapter 11, the people whose faith in God allowed them to live out what they believed, to have a hope of heaven into this world, all these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting they were foreigners and strangers on earth. They recognized, this is not my home. I am only a foreigner and a stranger here, and my home is elsewhere. My home is a hope of heaven that is coming one day, and I welcome it even though it's not here, and I look forward to it. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. The hope of heaven is what spurred these people to do things that they would normally have never done. Like, if you think about it, I don't know without something like the hope of heaven why a guy like Noah would forego every comfort of this world to build a giant boat. Like, it just doesn't make sense. Like, it doesn't make sense if you don't have a hope of heaven why a guy like Abraham would uproot himself and his family from the place they have lived their entire life to go to a completely and foreign land because God told him to, unless there's a faith in God and a hope of heaven that tells him this isn't it. Like, I don't know how a guy like Moses leaves the comfort of shepherding in the desert to go and challenge the most powerful man and the most powerful nation in the world unless there's a hope of heaven and a recognition this is not it. A hope of heaven should spur us, much like them, onto great things in this world, not because we're trying to make this world comfortable for ourselves or turn this world into what we want it to be, but engaging this world because we have a hope of heaven and we want everybody else to understand that hope of heaven, to understand that home is not in the here and the now. The hope is of the home that is coming. C.S. Lewis, as he continues in that book, Mere Christianity, talks on this subject. He says this: hope means a continual looking forward to the eternal world. It does not mean that we are to leave the present world as it is. If you read history, you will find that the Christians who did most for the present world were just those who thought most of the next. The reality of a hope of heaven, a hope of that thing that's coming, should spur us on to engage this world so that others can experience that, so others can know that hope of heaven. The problem is that we lose sight of that, and our gaze gets focused on the here and the now. As C.S. Lewis continues, he says this: it is since Christians have largely ceased to think of the other world that they have become so ineffective in this. Aim at heaven, and you will get earth thrown in. Aim at earth, and you will get neither. We get so caught up with this world, and our mind and our gaze changes from the hope of heaven to this world and our immediate circumstances. And here's the thing, whatever you think of as home here on this world, whatever that is, it does not stack up to the hope of heaven. Whatever you think of as home here in this world, it does not come close to the hope of heaven. The writers of the song, Bill and Taffy and John, I don't know if they knew this instinctively or unconsciously. I don't know if they knew this overtly. But I find it fascinating that the song that resonates with people about going home, about their home, the very first words of the song, like literally the first two words of the song are almost heaven. The first thing that's sung in that song is almost heaven, West Virginia. Even if you built the best home that you could here on this world, if you got everything you wanted, and you could turn this and you could tame that wild into whatever you wanted, the closest that you can get to the hope of heaven is almost. But here's the problem with that. It's easy to become addicted to almost. Man, it's real easy to become addicted to the almost here. It's real easy to become addicted to, well, I'm just going to make this place the best I can for myself. It's real easy to become addicted to the things you can find here and the comforts that we can find here. But it's still only almost. So I want to close with a question. I want to close with a question, and I would love for you to think about this question this week. I would love for you, as you go to work and as you go around Rochester and you do the things you do, I would love for you to think about this question this week, and it's this: what do we do when we feel in the wild? What do we do when we feel in that moment in the wild that man, something is not right here, and or this doesn't feel right, or man, I feel like I want home? what do you do when you feel in the wild? Do you in that moment decide, I'm going to try to tame this wild? I'm going to try to make this wild what I want it to be. I'm going to try to make this comfortable for myself. I'm going to try to turn this into what I think it should be. Or, when you feel in the wild, do you look to God? Do you remember what he says about you? Do you remember that there's a hope of heaven, that there is something greater than this world, that our true home is not here, that we are strangers and foreigners here, and that home is the hope of heaven that's coming? And as a result of that, then go out into the world and influence the world so that others, not to make it better for us or to make it more comfortable for me, but that I engage the world so that others who feel like they're in the wild can know the hope of heaven as well. What do we do when we feel in the wild? God, I pray for each and every one of us that when that is the case and we feel like we are not at home and we feel like we are in the wild, that instead of seeking to make this what we want, instead of seeking to tame the wild and to make it comfortable for us and to turn it into what would make us happy, that we look to you. We remember the hope of heaven. We remember that this is not home. We remember you have promised us something far greater. And we would not settle for almost, but we would fully grasp the hope of heaven, and that would lead us into the world to radically transform this world so that others, not ourselves, but others would come to know the hope of heaven also. I pray that we would do that, God, and I pray this in the beautiful name of Jesus. Amen.